I'm Rit Udison, Executive and Artistic Director at the Loft Literary Center. Welcome to this live stream at Virtual Wordplay. I'm so glad you're here with us. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what brought us here today. For the last year, the Loft staff has been working hard to put together an outdoor book festival that would have gathered 100 authors with 10,000 visitors in our neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. As COVID-19 hit, we knew we had to think about everything we do differently, especially this festival. While we were disappointed that we wouldn't be able to gather in person, we became even more committed to supporting writers, celebrating new books, and finding new ways to assert the connective power of the written word. In a time of anxiety, we want to offer a powerful event for readers, writers, and booksellers. When we first approached our sponsors, their first question was, what is a virtual festival? And to be honest, we didn't know. Our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, agreed to make a leap of faith with the Loft. With courage, generosity, and vision, they have worked alongside us to figure out what this virtual festival might become. We are grateful to our sponsors and donors. Their generosity is incredible, but it is not enough. We believe it is essential, especially during a health and financial crisis, to offer programs that are free and accessible to all. But that has led to a significant revenue loss. A live event would have included ticket revenue, beer sales, exhibitor fees, and additional sponsorships. The Loft is not closed. We continue to offer classes, fellowships, conversations, support for readers and writers in addition to this festival. We are here to support the literary community, and we ask that you continue to support us. If you are able, please consider making a contribution to the Loft today. Thank you for being here.
Hi, and welcome to the first of 5 installments of Uncharted territory, where we're going to talk about reading books and reading astrological charts. Huge thank you to Steph Opitz at The Loft for putting this series together, and to our sponsors, St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune. I'm Claire Comstock-Gay, the author of Madame Clairvoyant's Guide to the Stars. And today I'm so excited, we're going to be talking to C Pam Zhang, author of the incredible, just released, How Much of These Hills is Gold. Hi, Pam. Thank you for talking to me today.
Hi, Claire. Thanks for doing this.
So I truly loved your book so very much. And because we're going to be talking not just about astrology, but about your book today, could you describe it for us briefly?
Yeah, so I actually have it here in front of me. How Much of These Gold is a book I wrote with the intention of making a new sort of American epic. The reason for that being I spent a lot of my formative years in the American West in Northern California, and I always loved books that took place here, but I didn't really see anybody like myself reflected in them. So this is a sort of like gold rush Western that follows 2 children of immigrants who one day wake up and see that their father has died in the night, and this sort of sets them out on a quest.
Yeah, it's such a epic quest. It's so, yeah, it's the best Western book ever, I think. And I want to talk about the book a little bit more later, but I also want to talk about astrology. I'm curious, kind of what your relationship to astrology has been in your life, right? Are you like a true believer? Do you follow it for fun? Do you think it's annoying and strange, right? No judgment. What's it like for you?
I mean, it's funny because I think you and I talked about this a couple of years ago when we were at like a kind of writing retreat together. And I think that I had always been sort of skeptical of astrology for a long time in my life, but actually talking to you sort of like changed the way I felt about it a little bit, because I used to believe that everyone who knew anything about astrology was like deeply spiritual, like believed it down to their bones, would like dictate, right, their life decisions based on what their chart said. And then once I talked to you, I realized there are actually a lot of people who look at astrology in like a fun but also more pragmatic way, where I think it like it shows you more about yourself. It's more like, I called it like it's kind of like the Myers-Briggs, or rather Myers-Briggs is like astrology for people who think they're like intelligent, right? It's about like what you take out of the test and how you proceed from there.
Totally. And I wonder, I know this is something we've talked about a little bit before too, I think it has a lot to do with kind of people's feelings about astrology, right? Your sun sign is Capricorn. Do you identify with that? Do you feel like it describes you?
Um, I'm always really upset when I read Capricorn horoscopes or like characteristics, because I think it does define some of me, but also I'm like, man, it makes it sound so boring and sad and mean. And I don't think that's all of who I am.
Yeah, I'm not a Capricorn. But the cat, like, man, talk about just getting the short stick every single time, right? All of the books describe you guys as so stodgy and so boring. It really drives me crazy, right? Like, the businessman is always like the archetype of the Capricorn. And I think that's so just insulting to write a lot of like real like weirdos and geniuses in the world who are Capricorns.
Also, often I feel like it makes us seem as if we have no emotions.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about Capricorn and kind of what I see, as like the truth and the falsehood and kind of the like easy descriptions. And then we'll look at your chart in a little bit more detail.
Very excited.
So for Capricorn, right, it's an earth sign. And that means, like all the earth signs, that it's really kind of practical and focused on the material world, versus like air signs who are really in their head and about thinking, or water signs who are really emotive and like intuitive, right? Earth signs are thought to be pretty practical. And so I think that's where some of that like, emotion, business person thing comes from. But of course it's a lot more than that always. It's not, no one is so boring as they describe the Capricorns. I think what's more useful to me often is to think of it as the sign of like the sign of discipline, right? It's the sign of like being aware of and willing to work within the structures of the world. I wonder, I don't know, does that feel right to you? I'm curious.
Yeah, I actually was just remembering how I was at this like party recently where I was telling somebody, so I actually have a day job in addition to being a writer. I think most of us do. And I was talking to someone about how I had sort of structured my life around it. And they're like, oh, are you a person who just like always figures out the rules and how to make the best of them for yourself? And I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. It also sounds kind of cold-blooded to put it that way. But that's what I was thinking of when you were saying that thing about rules. And
totally.
I think it is as much about sometimes about like figuring out how to subvert rules.
Yes. Right, because I think that's what gets lost in it, right? Because who can subvert the rules better than the one who knows exactly how to set up, right?
Exactly.
Which is something that I think is very true about your book too, right? It strikes me as a book that's so aware of kind of not just the rules of the genre of the Western, but kind of the rules of how, we tell stories in America. And it's a book that's decided like, no, I know exactly how these are, and that's not the game I want to play, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that's very wise. I've talked a little bit about how sometimes the way I wrote this book was to sort of like take down the myth of the American dream, which is like a very simplistic thing that many of us, especially those of us who come from immigrant backgrounds, have heard from very early on. In fact, the Chinese word for San Francisco, or rather the Chinese nickname for San Francisco, is Golden Mountain, because that's literally right. It's like the myth of coming here and just seeing like a heap of wealth. And it was really important to me to turn that idea on its head and show in this book how that is not only a false myth, but harmful to people who come here believing in it. And then when they don't make good on that success, they sort of turn it in on themselves and beat themselves up about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. Yeah, I think I'm wondering, I want to talk a little bit more about the book after, but I'm wondering just about your creative process. Do you feel like it's defined by discipline? Do you feel like it's defined Like, did you do a lot of research for the book?
I think I always have spurts of this. So when I first started writing the draft of the book, after I realized it was going to be a book, I kind of like wrote the first draft in a real crush of days, like one day after the other. I was pretty anal about it. I went to the same cafe. I tried to sit in the exact same seat. I ordered mostly the same food every day that I was there. But in terms of the research, I kind of, I had like a foundational basis of understanding about the Wild West and about the role of Chinese people there, just from having lived in California and attended that school system. But I sort of also promised myself that I was going to write the book without actively doing research in the drafting period, and then I would go back. So I guess in that way, I sort of set rules for myself about when research would come in and out.
Oh, that's so interesting. Was there anything, did the research you did end up doing, did it like turn on its head any of the assumptions you had made beforehand? Did it change things or refine them? Or both, I guess?
I think both. So there's sort of like a key plot point in the book at the very end that ties into a real world event, which is the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was done by a lot of Chinese immigrant laborers who were then completely kept out of this sort of like celebratory photograph that they staged. And that was something that actually came about because of the research. That was like, this is just like the perfect thing, like everything the railroad stands for. It's like civilization coming into West, right? The end of an era, exploitation. It all sort of came to a head, and that made it into the book fairly late because of the research.
Wow, that's like shocking to me. That seems like something that you would build a book around, right? Like it was so perfect for the story. Let's see. So I guess let's talk about your chart, right? Because astrology is the sun sign. That's the one that, if someone asks you your sign, you would say Capricorn, right? But you also have a moon sign, you have a Mercury sign, you have a Venus sign. There's 9 planets in astrology, including the moon and Pluto, which count as planets astrologically, if not astronomically. And so often I think looking at the big chart, if you have kind of an uneasy relationship with your sun sign, often the bigger chart will reveal or illuminate kind of the truths that you don't feel like were captured otherwise. Have you had your chart read before?
No, this is the first time.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay, well, so first I want to say, sometimes I look at a chart and it takes me a little while to kind of like for it to kind of resolve itself into an image that I can make anything with. Yours I look at and immediately it's like, okay, this is Pam's chart. And if I had to make like guess the chart for the author of this book, like it would be this one, right? It's so perfect. It's so beautiful. But so to start kind of beautifully, out of the 9 planets in a chart, including the sun, 5 of yours are in Capricorn. Oh, right? God. You're like heavy Capricorn. There's Mercury, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. And so there's something called a stellium, which is if you have 3 planets or more in a sign. It's kind of like some astrologers call it like a super planet, right? They like merge and become really powerful.
That's really scientific, by the way, Claire.
Super planet. We're nothing here in astrology if not scientific all the time. But so, right, that means just that this Capricorn energy really is, right, there's really a lot of it. And I think that's really, it's like a powerful energy. It's really strong. I think it's interesting. So Mercury specifically is the planet of communication, the planet of thought, the planet of how we connect with each other. And so I like looking for writers specifically at their Mercury sign. I think it's really useful and really interesting, right? Kind of to see not just how we communicate, but what matters to us, what we want to communicate, what's important in our connections with one another. And I think, it's just great that yours is Capricorn. I feel like, right, this is something that I think might not be one of the things people talk about most with Capricorn, But to me, I really strongly feel it to be kind of the sign of like a moral seriousness, right? Which is not the same thing as like moralism or morality, right? But kind of a real awareness that our actions in the world matter, that our actions have consequences. It's really the sign, I think, of being aware of like our debts to one another, which is really a strong theme in your book, I think, right? The different debts that we place on one another, the different debts that we owe. And these are all kind of themes running through the book. I always think about, you know, when Virginia Woolf said about George Eliot, who's a Capricorn moon, that Middlemarch was like the only book written for grown-up people or whatever, right? Like, to me, Capricorns write books for grown-up people. And that's kind of a lot of what I see in yours.
A really beautiful way to put it.
Which I love too, right? Because it's very much a book about being a child, right? It's a book about growing up and being young. But it's also got that real inner seriousness, and it's a book for people who don't want sentimentality, people who, you know, look at the world seriously. Let me see. Yeah, so and I love it too, right? The Mercury and Capricorn, what I see in your work, right, is like a real care and a real intention with every single word in the book, right? And it's lyrical and it's beautiful, but never in a way that feels like slight or like beauty is the only thing there, right? There's always an intention underneath. I wonder if that's your sense of yourself, right? Sometimes I think readers get different impressions and the writer's like, oh no, I was just doing the thing.
So two things. It's really interesting. I've been mulling over what you're saying about the seriousness and the fact that it is like, in many ways, it's a Bildungsroman, right? But I think what was important to me to reflect on the page was that for many children, especially like, you know, children who are marginalized living in this time period, in this nation, in the state in which it was in my book, there is no innocence of youth. And so that like seriousness, I think, echoes that. And then as far as the lyricism, oh man, Claire, let me tell you, the process of like cutting the book down was really crazy. Speaking of discipline, that was probably the most disciplined I was. I think the final draft, I actually sat alone in a room for 4 or 5 days and I read the entire book to myself, like recorded it and then played it back at, I think, something like 1.3x speed so that my voice was defamiliarized to myself. And that's how I cut it, because I needed to make sure every syllable like sounded like it was in its place.
Okay, yeah, that makes so much sense. I love that. What a feat. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I actually think secretly for Claire, maybe I shouldn't tell you this because your publishers wouldn't be happy, but I think I accidentally did 3rd pass edits when I was only supposed to do two passes. But I think they like took pity on me because they're like, I was like, I have like 800 changes to make, and they're like, okay, I guess we'll let you make 800 changes.
I love it. So that wasn't them telling you to cut it down. That was you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was me.
I love it. That's so perfect. But so, you know, lest it seems like Capricorn is the only thing we're going to talk about. It's not. You've got other things going on too. Specifically, you have your moon and your Jupiter in Cancer. And so the moon is the sign kind of your emotional center, your emotional baggage, your past, your inner life. And this is so striking to me because Capricorn and Cancer are exactly opposite each other on the zodiac wheel. And so those signs, right, to be like scientific again, sometimes astrologers call them sister signs. That's not really a real designation. It's more of just a descriptive way to kind of express the uneasy relationship between the opposite signs Right, in the same way that a sibling can be kind of the closest person to you in the world and also the person who drives you most crazy out of anybody in the world. Right, those opposite signs complement each other and kind of push against each other in tension. So where Capricorn is all about kind of discipline and structure, and ambition in the material world, Cancer is the sign of nurturing. It's the sign of your inner life. The sign, I get a little uneasy with some of the weirdly gendered language that astrology uses, but it's like the divine feminine or the great mother, right? It's this really soft, vulnerable side. And so I see a lot kind of how that is a tension in this book, I guess, right? Where there's the big story, the history, the factual, like violence that this whole country is founded on versus the story of a family, right? I wonder if that's a tension that you feel, if that's something that makes sense to you.
Yeah. I guess I did think of that contrast, I suppose, like the contrast of this like very small family unit against this like grand epic landscape. I didn't feel that they were in tension necessarily, and I actually like the framing of this opposition as sisters because it's both familiar, it's both like tense but also intimate. And I've just always liked how stories set against really sweeping landscapes can sort of make small, mundane family scuffles feel both universal and epic and important. So that was important to me to have in the book.
Yeah.
I really love this designation of sister signs.
Right, I do. I really love it too. Yeah. And I think it really captures a lot about complicated relationships, right? There's the intimacy and the difference, right? All bound up in one. Which is also nice because your book is a story about siblings, right? And very much about that, like really loving somebody and not understanding somebody all the time, right? Because they're a different person than you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, the mailman's outside shouting.
Wow, he's very invested in his job. Is he shouting for you?
Yeah, and when I say, just one more note about that, I guess, when I say tension, right, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think tension can be a really productive force, like in a person or in a creative work. Right, and I think, right, it like deepens the work to have these two, not competing even, but just different drives going on. And I love, again, just with the Cancer Capricorn tension or whatever word we want to use, right? Kind of this real emotion combined with unsentimentality, right? Like it's a different kind of emotion. It's not about easy solutions. Love's not like an easy thing.
Yeah, one thing that I think that one characterization of my book that I think often gets overlooked in like this discussion of events like a Western or about history and so on and so forth is I actually really think it's deeply a book about grief and about the fact that these two siblings in my novel start off with this like horrific thing of their father dying suddenly, but they can't sort of like dwell on the soft, fuzzy feelings of that because they immediately have to kick into survival mode. They have to plan, they have to like move, they have to take action. And so in some ways, I do think that's like sort of like the Cancer warring with the Capricorn, where I guess that the way the novel starts out, like it's like the Capricorn impulses that like save them. But the book is also deeply concerned with how like emotions such as grief that are repressed or forcibly pushed to the side will come back up again.
Totally. Is there anything else, I'm curious, that you feel like hasn't been kind of seen in your book?
One thing that was really important to me to get in this book was the sort of like the degradation of the environment and the natural landscape by people, and how that's also a very, very uneasy relationship. And that wasn't to me like the core of the book, but it's also inescapable when talking about how colonizers, how people, and how prospectors, how all these people who came to the West for opportunism also destroyed the landscape. And that's something that I don't think gets talked about as much.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, so I don't know if I have too much else for you, but I would love it if you could read just a little bit from your book before we close.
Yes. So I'm going to read from this section where the two siblings, Lucy and Sam, have sort of reached kind of the conclusion of the first part of their quest. They've been traveling, looking for a place to bury their father, and they come across something. So I'll start there. It's on page 42 for anyone who's curious. They've nearly reached the foot of the mountains 1 week later when the rib in the sky thickens. Wolf moon, rarest kind. Bright enough that after sunset and star rise comes moonrise. Silver prize their eyes awake. The blades of grass, the bristles of Nellie's mane, the creases of their clothes illuminated. Across the grass, an even brighter glow. Like two still sleeping, they rise from their blankets and walk. Their hands brush. Did Sam reach across, or is it a coincidence of strides grown similar thanks to Sam's new height? The light comes from a tiger skull. It's pristine, the snarl untouched. Chance didn't place the skull. The beast didn't die here. No other bones surround it. The empty sockets face east and north. Follow its gaze, and Lucy sees the very end of the mountains, where the wagon trail curves to the plains. It's, Lucy says, heart-quickening. A sign, Sam says. Most times, Lucy can't read Sam's dark eyes. Tonight, the moonlight has pierced Sam through, made Sam's thoughts clear as the blades of grass. Together, they stand as if at a threshold, remembering the tiger Ma drew in the doorway of each new house. Ma's tiger, like no other tiger Lucy has seen, a set of 8 lines suggesting the beast, only if you squinted. A cipher. Ma drew her tiger as protection against what might come, singing Lahu, Lahu. Ma drew her tiger in each new home. Song shivers through Lucy's head as she touches the skull's intact teeth. A threat or else a grin. What was the last word of the song? A call to the tiger. Lie. What makes a home, Lucy says. Sam faces the mountain and roars. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Pam. That was really wonderful. Thank you for your book also. For everyone watching, Pam's book is available at the link provided on screen. I obviously highly recommend it. You can also check out loftwordplay.org for future programming. I'll be back again next week with Claire Beams, author of The Illness Lesson. Thank you again to Wordplay sponsors St. Catherine's University and Star Tribune. Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you. Wait, one last thing. Claire's can I photobomb the Zoom? Claire's book is also coming out this month. Is it this month, Claire?
Yeah, April 21st.
And it's wonderful and contains a lot of the wisdom that she was just dispersing to us in this chat. So
thank you.